Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Snails, slugs, earwigs. Who's chewing on your plants? Well, in fairness, it could be birds too. But today we have control tips for the slimy and sinister looking big three of snails, slugs, and earwigs. Did you know that 1 out of every 3 bites of food you eat comes courtesy of a bee? We have advice on attracting bees and other pollinators to your yard. It's all on this, episode 10 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. And we'll have you in and out in under 30 minutes. Don't worry, we won't sting you. Here on the Garden Basics podcast, we like to tackle your garden questions. And I like to bring in the heavy guns when we're answering garden questions, and I can't think of any better gun than Debbie Flower. Debbie Flower, retired horticultural college professor, has gardened throughout the United States and knows her plants and knows why, too, about the plants and the bugs and all that. So, Debbie, if you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready.
All
I've
right.
been called a gun before, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, I was trying to be nice. It just didn't come out right, that's all.
Water pistol, how about that?
Okay, Pistolero. Karen writes in and says, so what do you recommend to control earwigs? I'm not going to do the semi-buried jar lids of vegetable oil anymore. Last year, the earwigs ruined many of my zinnia plants, so I want to get ahead of them this year. Well, first of all, she mentions the semi-buried jar lid of vegetable oil, and in many earwig control instructions, you might see that where you take a mayonnaise jar lid or some small lid and put a couple of drops of cooking oil and some water in it and then bury it up to the lip in the soil where the earwigs might be traveling. And theoretically, they get in the oil and stay there.
Yes, sometimes I also add a little soy sauce for some good aroma to attract them. And yes, the insects in general breathe through their skin. And so once they get oil on them, they can't breathe anymore. So it does kill them. Yes.
Wow. Ooh, I saw that movie. It was called Goldfinger.
Okay.
All right. But there's a lot of other earwig controls. I still, one of my favorites is rolling up a damp newspaper and putting it out where you see them at night and putting that newspaper out in the evening and then going back in the morning, and they're usually snug and cozy inside that rolled up newspaper, and then you can just shake them off into a bucket of soapy water.
Right. They work at night. They're out at night, so you won't see them during the day. And they come out and do their feeding at night. And the susceptible plants are typically the seedlings. So when Karen talks about them ruining many of her zinnia plants, I suspect that was when the zinnias were very young. She just put them in the ground. And so a lot happens in the garden at night when we're not there watching. And earwigs is one of those. Earwig feeding is one of those things. And so, yeah, you can put out the damp rolled up newspaper at night near the seedlings where they're going to feed. And then when they're done feeding that night, they will climb into the damp newspaper as a place to spend the day. And it works if you can keep that newspaper moist, as does the buried lid of vegetable oil. When they're done, they're very attracted to the odor is what I hear. They will crawl right in and kill themselves. But the other thing that I use, and I use it sparingly, but I do use it when I have seedlings in the ground that I value, and that is a product called Sluggo Plus. It is Sluggo for the slugs that it is a bait. It is a bait that is attractive to slugs and snails, and they will eat it and die. And slugs and snails are big in California, but I also know that I've seen them in my mother's garden in New York. I think they're traveling around the country in potted plants. So if you've never seen them before, again, they feed at night when it's moist and cool. You may want to check your garden at night. But the Sluggo Plus is a very earth-friendly, organic. It is organic certified. OMRI listed is what you look for to find a pesticide that's organic certified. OMRI is the Organic Material Review Institute, and if a product has OMRI, OMRI, on the label, then it can be used in organic production. And so this is a product that is OMRI listed, and it does work on slugs, but the plus part, you can buy just Sluggo, which is iron phosphate. You can buy other brands of iron phosphate. But the plus part of this product is spinosad. It's another product, also OMRI listed. It's a natural substance that's normally made by soil bacteria, so things that are already living in your garden have the ability to make it. But it's a concentrated form, and it is very effective at controlling earwigs. So that is a product I would use in my garden to get earwigs. But one thing to know if you do use it is read a label, as with all pesticides. But this one you use 1/2 to 1 teaspoon per square yard.
That's not much.
That's very little product over that area. It can be toxic to worms, earthworms. So please read the label and follow all label instructions.
Definitely. And as you mentioned, the active ingredient are iron phosphate and the spinosad. And the iron phosphate, from everything I read about it, is it works better if it's slightly damp. So perhaps after applying it, lightly sprinkle the area, and that I think puts out an aroma or something that attracts the slugs, the snails, and probably the earwigs.
Okay. Yeah. I remember hearing a presentation by a representative of one of the companies that sells iron phosphate, and it's made on pasta equipment. So it's made like spaghetti and chopped into little pieces. So if you can think of, dry spaghetti in the box, it's pretty hard stuff. And slugs and snails have very soft bodies. Some controls of slugs and snails include just physical things that we don't find. Diatomaceous earth is one of them. To us, it feels soft, almost like talcum powder, but to a slug and snail, it cuts up their little bodies. So rough pasta, if you can think of pasta broken into little tiny pieces, would have rough edges. But if it's soft from some moisture, that would solve the problem and make it much more palatable, I would think. Not being a slug or snail, I can't really say, though.
Now, we should point out we were talking about a very specific product and even a subset of a specific product. Sluggo Plus is different than Sluggo. Sluggo by itself, which controls snails and slugs, is iron phosphate. It's Sluggo Plus that also includes the spinosad. And I think that's actually a better way to go, because a lot of people have trouble. I have trouble trying to ascertain of who did the damage to the young plant. Was it a slug? Was it a snail? Or was it an earwig?
Right. Yes. And I did start out this year using only the iron phosphate in my garden, but I was still having trouble with losing seedlings overnight, or getting seedlings that were very damaged. And a little damage is good, actually. In a vegetable garden, a little damage to the plant actually activates physiology inside of the plant that actually can make the plant more healthy to us and more healthy for itself. It activates defenses. So a little damage, you need to have an action threshold, and the action threshold should not be a little bit of damage. You should not act to control the pest until the pest is taking over the garden and eliminating what you want to grow. So that's one topic. But yeah, I was using I know I have slugs and snails in my garden. I've weeded and come out with them on my hands. So I did put out the iron phosphate alone, but I was still seeing damage and losing seedlings to something else. And earwigs are the next suspect in my yard. And when I used a little bit of the spinosad, it worked very well.
Going back to the rolled up damp newspaper, that would clue you in that it definitely would be earwigs if you found earwigs in that rolled up newspaper the following morning. I don't think slugs and snails would tend to spend the night there. I think they would tend to go back to wherever they came from.
They also look for moist, dark places to hide, but that unfortunately, great moist, dark places include the interface between, in a raised vegetable garden, that spot between the soil and the wall of the vegetable garden. stays nice and dark and stays moist. And so they spend their days right next to the plants they're going to eat that night. They really do need a lot of moisture. They have a different exoskeleton, which is the outside of the insect. They have slugs and snails are much softer and moister on the outside than an earwig is. And so the slugs and snails need a greater amount of moisture to survive the day, the warm, hot, dry day.
Now, if you are used to using other snail control products, you may be disappointed when you use iron phosphate, the Sluggo or Sluggo
Yes.
Plus, because you will not see the dead snails. They take it back to their nest where they share it with their buddies. And it's not uncommon to find a snail nest full of dead snails. You do not get the thrill of the kill like you would find with something that has the active ingredient metaldehyde. But trust me,
Correct.
You want to use iron phosphate. You don't want to use metaldehyde because of its toxicity to children and pets.
Yes, you have to get over that. The fact that you're not going to see all of that mucousy mess that killing slugs and snails with the other type, the metaldehyde bait, produces, but it is a very effective control, and it is much more environmentally friendly, and it is not harmful to our pets or wildlife. I should also say there are other pesticides that contain spinosad, and it comes in different forms, but the different forms work in some cases for other insects and not on earwigs. So a pesticide label always, by law, has to say what pest it is used on and in what garden situation. And so when in doubt, it also has to list the active ingredients. So when in doubt, actually not when in doubt, always read the pesticide label to be sure that it is labeled for the pest you want to control in the situation. So this would be landscape gardening, vegetable gardening. You want something that if you're using it in a vegetable garden, you want to be sure it's not going to poison the food that you eat. And also that it will show spinosad as one of the active ingredients. That
is the first step in what we've been calling integrated pest management in controlling pests, starting with the least toxic alternatives. Step number one is always identify the pest. Yes. And positively identify the pest. And that can be difficult. You may need to take it somewhere. If your state has a Master Gardener program, to take it to one of their events, or probably communicate with them by email. Pictures are always good. Ag commissioners in the state of California are a possibility. Take it into the nursery and show the people who work there, and potentially they can help you. One good habit to get into if you like taking pictures of unidentified critters in your garden and then showing it to people to get it identified is to have a reference point in the picture. It could be as simple as a coin that you put next to the pest or the bug. Absolutely. And so we can get an idea of what the size is, or if you're really technical, you could put a ruler under it. But that was a requirement in both plant ID class and in pest management class when the students made their collections of plants and pests. They could use pictures, but there had to be scale in there, a penny or a ruler or something of known size. Did you make them use metric rulers? No, I let them choose the scale, and if it was something obscure, someone used a euro, they had to put a sample of it in their collection. Wow. A real one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, I'm getting a text in here from the Earwig Appreciation Society, and they're reminding us that earwigs do have a beneficial purpose in the garden. They like to munch on aphids. Oh, okay. I was going to say they're very good at breaking down organic matter and releasing the nutrients back to the soil. So there are at least two wonderful reasons that we have earwigs in the garden. So we're not looking to eradicate them from your yard, period. Eradication means they're gone and you'll never see them again. We're just looking to control them at the location where they are feeding on your baby. It would be baby plants to the point of losing those baby plants. And only once the plants grow past the baby stage, generally earwigs are not an issue, and you want to stop control. And I'm reading here on the University of California website, the IPM page on earwig control. And Karen said that her zinnias were really taking a hit from them. And sure enough, earwigs may also seriously damage flowers, including zinnias, marigolds, and dahlias.
So it may have been the flowers, not just the seedlings.
Yeah, it could have been.
Yeah, I have seen earwigs sleeping, it appears anyway, inside flowers.
One thing you really need to do, too, if you're trying to figure out, well, is it an earwig or a slug or a snail? Take a flashlight, go out late at night and look around, and you just might see them. Or another way to identify what might be eating your garden is to sprinkle some flour, kitchen flour. I know that's a precious commodity these days, but take some kitchen flour and spread it beneath the plant. And look for trails or footprints the following morning.
Right. We might also add that earwigs, of course, we have the internet and people can look up what an earwig is. They're also called pincher bugs because they have pinchers on their rear end. They do not harm humans. I assume they use those pinchers for other defense. Big ID characteristic.
Well, we found out a lot today about controlling earwigs and snails and slugs, and keep them out of your garden. It takes a lot of vigilance and a lot of steady work. Debbie Flower, thanks for a few minutes of your time, and let's go kill some slugs and snails and earwigs.
All righty. Sounds like fun.
There are several ways to reach us here at the Garden Basics Podcast. Call or text us at 916-292-8964. That's 916-292-8964. Email your questions and pictures to fred@farmerfred.com or post your garden queries at the Get Growing with Farmer Fred Facebook page or at Farmer Fred on Twitter. For a successful garden, well, you need a little bit of help. And fortunately, nature provides that assistance with a wide array of pollinating insects and birds, and beneficial insects, too, that go after the garden bad guys. And that allows you to reduce the use of pesticides that you might think you need to use. But to attract those beneficials and pollinators to your yard, you have to lend them a helping hand. And that's the impetus for the new book, The Pollinator Victory Garden. It's by New York-based environmental horticulturist Kim Eierman, who's also the founder of Eco Beneficial. And she explains that small changes to our landscape can make huge environmental improvements. And she offers up a lot of great tips in the book about getting pollinators to your yard. And we're talking with Kim Eierman back in New York. And Kim, you have an interesting biography in that you left Wall Street to pursue environmental horticulture.
Oh, boy, Fred, you gave up my dirty little secret, didn't you? I did. I went from one type of green to another. I was always a kid who loved nature. I mean, it was just in me. Always wanted to be outdoors, always wanted to go hiking, always wanted to be in the woods. Many years ago, we moved from New York City, where there wasn't a heck of a lot of nature, to Westchester County. Lo and behold, our house is about 7 miles away from the New York Botanical Garden. And I started to take classes, and I got really, really serious about this. So I combined my love of nature with my love of gardening and horticulture, and developed this business, Eco Beneficial, to really to teach and hopefully inspire folks to garden a little bit differently to help our very, very challenged environment.
So when you look out your window right now, what's in bloom? What does your garden look like?
Well, being here in the Northeast, we have a lot of those lovely woodland spring bloomers that are so charming. For example, we've got Mertensia virginica, which is Virginia bluebells in bloom right now, which is a lovely spring ephemeral. And it's one of those plants that comes up before the trees leaf out and feeds bees with its nectar and its pollen, and then dies back. It's an ephemeral, so you can plant, kind of double plant in that area. That's really a lovely one. And we've got some lovely wild geranium, which is not as most people think of geranium, which is a lovely woodland plant. Edge of the woods is usually where you find it. That's a great source for specific bees, mining bees that have evolved with that plant. And about 25% of our native bees in North America are pollen specialists. So planting these plants that they've evolved with in addition to kind of generalist plants, is really an important thing to do.
You bring that up in your book a lot, the book, The Pollinator Victory Garden. So let's talk about some of the tips that you offer up in the book. One of them makes perfect sense. Plant for a succession of blooms through the growing season.
Mm-hmm. And we may think we're doing it, but when we start to take a closer look, we may find that we've got a lot of gaps in bloom time. So I encourage folks to start making a list of what's in bloom throughout the entire growing season. And for us here in the Northeast, that's going to be early spring through late fall. Parts of California, it might be almost year round. Look at what's in bloom. Make sure you've got at least 3 different plants that are in flower, whether it's trees, shrubs, vines, perennials, ephemerals, etc., that are in bloom at the same time with different floral characteristics to feed different types of pollinators.
So your plant season then is what, March through early December?
Our season here is pretty much March through, I would say, November-ish. Depends. I mean, with climate change, things, I've had things in bloom till almost the end of November, which is pretty extraordinary, historically speaking.
I was about to brag that we eat tomatoes off the vine for Christmas dinner.
There you go. A little bit different growing condition.
Yes, exactly. All right.
So you've got to plant more plants because you've got to cover more months.
Well, exactly. Yes, and we do too. Yes, in fact, in our area here in California, and still people get stumped as far as, well, what can I plant that is in bloom from November through March? And there are 2 plants that fit that bill, and they attract a whole host of pollinators, and they are rosemary and Euryopsis. Euryopsis pectinatus and all the forms of rosemary with their nice blue-violet flowers that keep the native bees happy all winter long.
And yeah, we'll give a shout out for 2 of your wonderful resources in California, CalScape and CalFlora, where you can find out what native plants are native to your region, and make sure you're planting for the critters that evolved in your area.
Well, that's also another one of your tips. Include some native plants to support pollinators and the ecosystem.
Sure. My focus, truthfully, Fred, is native plant, very much specifically. All of us are entitled to a few dalliances with, non-invasive, non-natives. But I think with our challenged climate change situation and our environment being so degraded, that we really can make big differences if we focus on plants that have evolved with the wildlife around us and support our ecosystems.
Yeah, and it's amazing the number of species of insects that thrive on very specific native plants. Like right now in bloom here in California is the California Dutchman's pipe. And there's a species of butterfly that survives solely off that plant.
Right.
And that's the pipe vine swallowtail butterfly.
So you've got, and you'll see that coast to coast. So that's likely an Aristolochia species, which we have here in the east. And a lot of these woody plants that are native, many of them are host plants for butterfly or moth caterpillars. And we can really do ourselves a favor if we want more of those creatures in our landscape and support them, because they're endangered too, by having host plants in addition to plants that say, we're buying also for flowers. And then in many cases, we have plants that do both things very well.
Just like we are distracted while driving down the freeway at the huge neon signs that are over our freeways here, it's true in the plant world as well, where we need, as you point out, to plant a diverse array of plants with different flower shapes, sizes, and colors, and then basically turn them into floral targets, if you will.
Right. So there's a principle that I call achieving floral balance in our landscapes. That's kind of a good way to think about this. We need to have a diversity of plant species to feed different types of pollinators, because not every pollinator goes to the same type of plant. And pollinators can include things from bees, butterflies, moths, flies, bats, beetles, birds. And not every species within those groups is a pollinator, obviously, but likely, if you're living in North America, you probably have pollination from almost all those creatures, except for maybe bats. And in Southern California, very southern, in parts of the Southwest, you'll see some bat pollination of saguaro, cactus, and agave. But most of us can attract all these other creatures by planting diversely. But getting back to floral balance, we also have to plant sufficiently. And that means creating floral targets that pollinators can find easily. And some research out of University of California Bee Lab at Berkeley, wonderful place. And California Birds and Blooms is an excellent book. I encourage folks to buy my book and buy that book too. It's a great book. So they've discovered that a target of one species of about 3 square feet is ideal for most pollinators to find. So some of us can achieve that. Some of us don't have landscapes that are large enough for that. And if we have a smaller landscape, we can compromise a little bit and we can create repeating targets of smaller groups of plants throughout the landscape. And even in some areas, we might want a very naturalistic landscape like a prairie or a meadow, where we can create that erratic bloom of plants. And many pollinators will still find that fairly easily. And the reason for that is creatures like bees, creatures like butterflies have a behavior called floral constancy, and they go on a foraging mission, and they're looking for one species of plant. So if you have a meadowscape or a prairiescape arrangement, they'll find what they need.
Exactly. Speaking of bats, a lot of California's farmers are now incorporating bats into their pest control methodologies by creating bat habitat in order to keep them around the farm to go after the insect population.
Sure. Bats, like most creatures, invertebrates and vertebrates alike, are in trouble worldwide. So any help we can give them is good. There not too many species of bats that are pollinating bats in North America, but there are a couple.
Anyway, one of the most important tips I think you present in the Pollinator Victory Garden to win the war on pollinator decline with ecological gardening is, boy, I've been harping on this for years, and it sure makes a lot of sense. Reduce or eliminate your lawn.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it the green desert. It is an ecological wasteland for creatures like bees. If you allow European weeds to infringe upon the lawn, that's a little bit better, but it doesn't replace good, solid native plant habitat. So keep the lawn that you really use. If you play on it, as your kids do, your pets do, you entertain on the lawn, keep what you really use, lose the rest. And whenever you keep, manage it organically. No pesticides. Pesticides and pollinators are a very poor mix. Even some of the preparations that we use, commonly use in our landscapes, even if they don't kill pollinators, they can be sublethal and weaken them significantly.
Definitely. And when you tear out that turf grass, put in some native plants. And here in California, we always encourage drought-tolerant plants that don't require much water in the big picture. And it's amazing. You put in native plants, all of a sudden, you've got native bees.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And of course, California has the greatest diversity of native bees in North America. I think you have over 1,000 species of native bees, which is pretty extraordinary. We here in New York, we have about half that, a little bit less than half of that. They are very many different shapes, sizes, colors, body strength, tongue length. Some don't even look like bees. So let's try to show some plant love for all of them.
We've been talking with Kim Eierman. She's the author of the book, The Pollinator Victory Garden, Win the War on Pollinator Decline with Ecological Gardening. Kim, if people want more information about the book, where can they go?
Well, please visit my website, which is ecobeneficial.com, and you can pick up the Pollinator Victory Garden at your local independent bookseller or any online stores that you like. And I've got a lot of supplemental information that accompanies the book on my website, including regional plant information. So please do visit.
All right. Again, that website, ecobeneficial.com, for more information, including those plant lists. Kim Eierman, thanks for spending a few minutes with us and getting the pollinators back into our yard.
Thanks so much, Fred. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to Garden Basics with Farmer Fred. I appreciate you listening. Would you please subscribe? You can find the podcast at Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Podcast Addict, and Hey Alexa, play the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Thank you. Oh, and one more tip. Go out to the yard today. Enjoy your garden. It'll make you smile.